Chapter 25. Only Jasper. Alli. Upon arriving back at the palace, Alli didn't get the chance to change, nor put her satchel away, but she didn't mind. She wanted to sketch the feast with her charcoal pencil. When else would she get the chance to witness something so spectacular? Saldr led them into the palace and once more into the dining hall from that morning. However, it had been decorated for the occasion. In addition to the torches along the walls, the table held tall, bone-colored candelabras down its center. The light from the skinny candles on each arm of the candelabras reflected on the metal. So many yalvs surrounded the table that Alli couldn't possibly count them all, without looking like a fool standing on the threshold for too long. Each wore their traditional robes, and Alli wished she could study all their hems to decipher what their occupations might be. But, alas, Saldr led her and Zeke over to sit next to Kase. He looked out of place with his curls and non-toga'd attire. He mustn't have been successful in whatever he'd been forced to do for the Lord Elder. Alli knelt on the floor pillow next to him, with Zeke on her other side. Saldr took a seat across from them, and next to the yalv who'd collected Kase that morning, Rudder. Rudder sat next to a pretty woman with ruby-red lips. Alli slung off her satchel and set it behind her, keeping it within reach for the moment she needed to sketch something important. Before she could ask Kase about his day, the Lord Elder stood, and the room hushed as if the curtain at Grieg's theatre had risen. Alli leaned forward, her elbow knocking the Zuprium plate in front of her. She caught it before it knocked into the candelabra. Kase shook his head with a small smile before turning toward the Lord Elder.
We bless this feast as Toro blesses us. Our lives glorify Toro, and let us remember thus which he bestowed upon us at the beginning of time, our duty as Chronos. May he guide us on our way to the mountains at this life's end.
Oh, how she wished she could write down every word. She would have to do her best to remember it all when she had time to pull out her sketchpad. Once she returned home, she would publish a book about her findings and dealings with the yalvs. While she'd been engrossed in her thoughts, yalvs with smoky swirls on their hems came into the hall, bearing large plates full of steaming meat and green leafy vegetables. Her mouth watered as soon as she caught the aroma. It smelled like steak dripping in melted butter. Oh, stars! The smoky-hummed yalvs set the platters along the table in between the candelabras. As they sat there on their knees around the table, Alli noticed the others were using their own forks to grab food for their plates. She followed suit. As she went to pile on what looked like a cousin to asparagus and the steaming brown meat, she paused at Kase's face. He was nearly as green as the vegetable she was about to grab. "Kase?" she whispered, setting aside her fork. Everyone was chatting, but she didn't want to draw attention because Kase looked like he was about to hurl. "Aren't you hungry?" He tapped his fork on his empty plate. He'd devoured everything the yalvs had fed them thus far, but not tonight. She tried again. "What's wrong?" He shrugged. Alli grabbed a hunk of meat and piled it on his plate. "You like steak, don't you?" Still, he hesitated, and she followed his gaze to find both Rudder and Saldr watching them with interest. Alli tilted her head. "Is there something wrong?" Kase shook his head. "I'm not hungry, that's all." "I find that hard to believe," she muttered.
Master Shackley,
Rudder sawed off a chunk of meat and held it out.
You have earned this feast and the benefits of slaying the Dragonar, have you not?
If possible, Kase's face became an even darker shade of green. Oh, stars, he's going to puke right here on the table. "Kase, if you need to—" "I'm fine," he hissed. He glanced at Rudder. "I didn't slay the—" He shut his mouth abruptly. Alli raised an eyebrow, and Zeke caught the end of the conversation. "What didn't you slay? You didn't tell us what you ended up doing." Rodder grinned, his pointed teeth showing.
Master Shackley hunted today, and he slew a dragonar, meaning he gets to—
Nothing! Kase's face was as red as the morning sun. It didn't mix well with the green already present. I don't get to do anything. Nothing at all. Salder raised his glass to Kase.
When you finally do claim your right of the hunt, I will support your decision.
Alli caught sight of Kase's fists under the table. While she smiled pleasantly at the Yalvs, who conversed about whatever a dragonar was, and the implications of one skirting too close to the city, she turned to Kase. Did you offend them somehow? You were supposed to help make the Lord Elder trust us. Zeke leaned across Alli. Yeah, and why'd they choose you to go hunting? You've never been. Kase ran both hands over his face. I told them that. He caught Hallie's eye. They took me out to hunt It was a dragon, all right, like the one we saw in the forest. It's for some ritual of theirs, and I almost didn't make it back in one piece. You saw another dragon? Alli squealed. She slapped a hand across her mouth when several Yalvs turned toward her. She gave them an embarrassed smile. Was it similar to the one we ran into? Are there more? Can they take me on their next hunt? I believe they had them on First Earth for a time before they went extinct. If you look at the right texts, you'll find that almost all ancient cultures had lore concerning them, and— She trailed off when the Yalvs, plus Kase and Zeke, all stopped to stare at her, slack-jawed. A sheepish blush warmed her face. I read a lot. They returned to their meals, and Alli lowered her voice. So back to the dragon. You didn't answer my questions. Kase looked down at her. It's not something I want to relive, thank you very much. He paused and quirked a brow. Is that a pencil in your hair? Huh? Kase pulled it out. With a smirk, he held it up. His face had regained some of its normal color. Because you never know when you're going to need to draw something. She narrowed her eyes. You say that like it's a bad thing. He chuckled a little as she grabbed her satchel and stuffed the pencil inside, but when she did, her fingers hit something rough and crinkled. The parchment, the one she'd found in the Odyssey earlier. She looked around, but no one seemed to care what she was doing. Salder and Rodder were speaking in Yalvan about some sort of ritual involving the dragonar. Zeke took a bite or two of his meat, and Kase pushed bits of his food around his plate. She snuck the parchment out and hid it under the table. With careful hands, she unfolded it, smoothing it out. The writing was sloppy, with some letters half-finished or smeared, but the message was clear. Only Jasper can work the gate. Alli didn't have to see her own face to know every single blood cell she possessed had fled her cheeks. Her head felt entirely too light, and her stomach too heavy, like a sack of stones inhabited its depths. What in the blasted burning stars? Jasper? Hadn't he been confused by what the gate did? How did— Then it clicked in her mind. Jasper was an essence. He might not have been when he'd written the book, but somehow, some way, he'd taken on one of the essences. But why did this matter now? How had this note gotten into her copy of the Odyssey? If the Searles were after the gate, did that mean they truly did possess the essence to work it? That they'd somehow captured Jasper? That didn't make sense either. Jasper Morgan lived and died centuries ago, yet Professor Christie did say Jasper would be in contact with the Lord Elder soon. Stars. It doesn't make any sense. What am I missing? Kase's hand found her shoulder. Shouldn't have eaten that meat. It's from that dragon. Alli, what's wrong? Her forehead beaded with sweat as she tried to calm her racing heart. Zeke looked over, concern etched across his features. Do you need to go lie down? I'm sure the Yalvs won't mind. She gripped the note so tightly it felt like it might combust at any moment. Only Jasper can work the gate. Lord Salder, she whispered as she leaned forward. Kase's hand fell away. She clutched her queasy stomach with one hand and the note in the other. The Yalv looked up, and Rodder did as well. She continued, Please, I don't mean to breach your trust, but Is the gate being protected? I have reason to believe the Searles—" She trailed off and looked around. Most of the other Yalvs were busy devouring the meal or conversing. A few had gotten up from their seats and begun to sing and dance in celebration of their god. Kase and Zeke were the only other ones listening. "I have reason to believe the Searles possess the essence that works the gate." Salder's golden eyes flicked to where the Lord Elder sat, drinking and conversing with the surrounding Yalvs. Rudder set his own drink down too hard, water sloshing out the side.
"You've not earned—"
Salder cut him off with a hand on his arm. He held Halli's gaze and seemed to choose his words with extreme care. "The essences died out centuries ago. Your treaty hasn't been broken." Halli gripped the edge of the table so hard she felt like her fingers were glued to it permanently. She kept her voice low. "Please, Lord Salder." She looked down at the note, then back into his golden eyes. "I have reason to believe the Searles indeed have a—" The doors to the feast hall banged open. Silence fell as a Yalvan man with swords and shields on the hem of his toga sprinted inside, his braided midnight hair coming loose and sticking to his sweaty face. It was strange, as most Yalvs would blink in and out of existence rather than run, but Halli didn't get to dwell on that oddity long. His words stole whatever thoughts she'd been thinking straight from her head. The cryptic note slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. The Yalv spoke in a slightly older Yalvan dialect, but Halli could still understand his words. "Invaders? Invaders at the gates?"
The room erupted in chaos.
Chapter 26. For once, will you just listen? Kase. In most situations of utter panic, Kase never had a clear head. He was decent at split-second decision-making no matter what his father thought, but that didn't mean those choices were always the best. One of those decisions had sent him to blasted Tassava. Yet now, when the entire feast hall erupted, cold calm washed over him. He glanced at Halli's frozen scream and Zeke's flared nostrils, but neither of them affected him in that glimpse in time. Not a flicker of fear, shock, or even surprise. This was something he could work with. If the city was under attack, he, Zeke, and Halli could slip out through the chaos and find Skibbs. He could steal a few of those Yalvan pistols and they would be off in a matter of minutes. He leaned around Halli to get his brother's attention. "Hey, Zeke, do you know how to work one of—" Before he could finish, Salder appeared behind him in a blink, grabbing his shoulder. "I will take you to your quarters." The Yalv's grip was too tight, the grimace on his face dark and uncompromising. Kase pulled free. "But what if we don't want to go to our quarters?" Halli's voice was too high. "The Searles are after the gate, Lord Salder." Kase whipped his head toward her. "The Searles? The Searles are the ones invading?" Halli nodded, and Kase cursed. Zeke stood, almost tripping a Yalvan man running from the room, shouting orders about the west gate into the city. Zeke's voice was the strongest it had been in days. "Allow us to help, Lord Salder. Kase and I can fight." But Salder shook his head, his eyes shadowed.
"I cannot take any chances. After this is over, we can speak, but right now I must get you back to your quarters. Please follow me. I do not want to force you."
Kase gritted his teeth but leapt to his feet. He held out a hand to help Halli, but she stood on her own. She grabbed her satchel and slung it over her shoulder with a shaking hand, the one miraculously healed. "Then let's go, Lord Salder. I know you want to help the others." He led them into the hallway, but before they left the room, Kase heard the Lord Elder's orders booming above the voices.
"I will need Kainadr. His soul has been lost these 1,000 years, and it is time I free him."
Any other words were cut off by the door slamming and Halli's tug on his arm. What was that? How did a soul get lost for a millennium? "Did you hear what he said?" Kase whispered as they sped down the corridor after the Yalv. Hallie's jaw was tight, but she nodded. Zeke kept stride beside Kase. What did he mean by freeing him? Halli shook her head. Not now. She looked toward Salder, who sped through the palace like a storm wind. Was he trying to lose them? Great shucks. The Yalv was also muttering to himself, and every so often his form would flicker. Each time he reappeared, his soft cry of pain grew louder. Lord Salder, Halli finally said after his 5th reappearance. He stumbled to a halt and swiveled. His eyes whipped to the sides of the corridor and back down at the 3 of them. Kase's stomach tightened. This behavior wasn't like the Yalv he'd come to know, but then again, Kase had only learned his name because he hadn't thought Halli and Kase would be good together. Halli spoke once more. Lord Salder, I'll make sure we get to our quarters and stay there. He looked at her hard.
I cannot allow that.
I know you'd rather be protecting your people, she said. Trust me, please.
Miss Walker, I cannot allow that.
Halli took his hand. He flinched a little before relaxing, and she continued. If it is indeed the Searles, they're after the gate, and you and I both know what they're capable of. Kase glanced at his brother, who hadn't moved a muscle. If Halli could convince Salder to leave them, then maybe they could pull this off and get out of there. Halli was good.
Thank you,
Salder whispered, and before Kase could blink, he disappeared. He shook his head. I still don't understand how they do that. Halli didn't offer any of her Yalvan knowledge. Instead, she said, We need to get to the temple. Zeke shook his head. Angering them is the worst thing we could possibly do. The palace should be the most well-defended structure, and with my skill, we might be able to help keep anyone from entering through the front archway. Have you both lost your blasted minds? Kase ran both hands through his curls and pulled. This might be our only chance to get out of here. We'll steal some supplies and a few weapons, then we can go find Skibbs. It's perfect. Hallie's eyes softened at the mention of Skibbs, but she plowed on. You're both wrong. If the Searles get a hold of this gate, and with us preparing to go to war, if we don't protect it, everyone in Jade will have to face however the Searles try to use that. They need an essence to work it, and I believe they have one. I can't. I won't let them get their hands on something that should be left well enough alone. She choked on her words, and Kase gritted his teeth. To the stars with Jade! If Skibbs is still out there, we need to help him. Stop thinking of yourself, will you? Zeke interjected, his eyes blazing. He glanced at Halli, then back to Kase. We're under attack, and all you can think about is, how is wanting to save Skibbs selfish? Kase took a step forward, but Halli put herself between them. This isn't helping. Zeke stepped around Halli and got right in Kase's face. His breath was hot. Ben is dead. You can't save him, Kase. You can't. This obsession you have with saving everyone has to stop. It's not healthy, and it puts everyone around you in danger. Kase's vision blurred with burning, angry tears. That's a bunch of stars-blasted crap, and you know it. Zeke's finger needled him in the chest. You couldn't save Anna, and you've been blaming yourself ever since. Shut up! Kase shouted, his voice echoing off the corridor walls and slamming against his eardrums. He shoved Kase, and his brother stumbled. I'm not going to fight with you right now. Hallie's voice rang out, silencing them both. Stop it! Fighting about whatever the stars you're talking about is getting us nowhere. If we don't protect the gate, we're screwed. Kase's breath came hard as he blinked back tears of frustration. He glanced at his brother and found him doing the same. But within a moment, the soldier mask was back on. Of course. I apologize. This is no time to lose our tempers. Kase didn't say a thing. He couldn't, because if he opened his mouth, he didn't know what would spew forth. Instead, he stormed past them both and headed up the corridor to their quarters. He was halfway down the final hall when the other two caught up. Halli spoke first. What are you doing? We have to get to the temple. He didn't turn. If we're going outside, I need my jacket, and I have a pocket knife. I don't know if we can get our hands on one of their pistols, so I'm going to need something. After visiting their quarters, the trio sprinted down empty hallways and staircases until they found themselves at the front archway. Kase flipped open his pocket knife, missing the reassuring weight of an electropistol at his side. He hoped they could find something better to use, or that they wouldn't have to fight at all. Maybe the Yalvs would take care of it before the invaders got as far as the palace. However, as soon as they stepped through the archway with its strange heatwave, shouts met their eyes, and the metallic tang of blood flooded his nose. He coughed and put a hand to his mouth. Bodies littered the stone beneath his feet outside the palace entrance. Empty-eyed Yalvs with blood bleeding from their dark hair stared up at him. They weren't the only casualties. Others lay among them like leaves scattered along the forest floor, except these bodies had diamond neck tattoos. Searles. Alli was right. Her face had turned the same shade of white as first moon, and Kase wasn't faring much better. Shouts came from his right, and he looked down into the fray where the fighting raged on. The Yalvs had beaten the Searles back from the palace steps. Golden light and sparkling bullets zinged from their pistols, but the Searles were answering with their own. Their bullets were blue lights flashing across the sky like shooting stars. Kase also spotted the stone statues that lined the main road up the palace. Instead of staying frozen and holding the lanterns like they'd been before, they fought alongside the Yalvs, their chiseled arms deflecting as many of the blue bullets as they could. However, unlike the electropistol, the Searle weapons worked. Each time a blue light struck a stoneman, large chunks of rock flew through the air. If that wasn't bad enough, Kase could only watch in horror as one of those bullets hit a Yalv. His chest exploded with blue fire, and he fell, silent. Holy shucks! Kase glanced down at the pocket knife clasped in his fingers. What a joke! He inspected the bodies in front of them. Some still held pistols loosely in their hands. He didn't think, only moved, dodging a glowing blue bullet and grabbing 3 pistols, all Yalvan. He shoved one into Zeke's hands, the other into Hallie's. He ignored more screams coming from the right. These work exactly like electropistols. Cock it and pull the trigger. When both Zeke and Hallie nodded, Kase turned back to the fighting. If we find cover over that way, he pointed to a collection of buildings nearby, we might be able to hold off some... He stopped. A few Searles had snuck around the outside, sprinting towards the giant door in the mountain. One of them lugged the great cannon weapon like the one Skibbs had disposed of in the forest. Hallie's words were nearly lost in the battle sounds. That's the temple! The gate! It's in there! Her eyes were wild. We have to stop them! Kase still didn't understand what the gate was, but he knew it was important, and it was time he trusted Hallie once more. He cocked his gun and aimed at the Searle with the cannon. He missed. Instead, the Searle turned and aimed the cannon right at Kase. Move! He, Hallie, and Zeke dove just as the cannon's blue-flamed blast hit the archway behind them. However, instead of exploding or disintegrating, the archway shook, shone with a blinding light, and absorbed the blast. There really was magic on this side of the world. Zeke recovered first and shot towards the Searles still making their way up the path to the temple. But the others lucked out, Zeke's bullets missing. Kase didn't know where the guards had gone. The Searles reached the massive door and shot the cannon at it. The metal reacted the same way the palace archway had, but the Searles weren't deterred. One dragged forward a struggling body. A Yalv. No, not any Yalv. Rudder. Zeke stopped shooting and Kase turned. Searles were trying to break off from the main fight. Kase fired again at the ones near the doors, but the weapon clicked, empty of its mysterious bullets. He stuffed it in the back of his pants and looked around, trying to find another weapon. No! Hallie shouted. He whipped his head up to find her running towards the mountain door. He caught the edge of her jacket. Her shout didn't stop the Searle from blasting Rudder's arm off at the elbow, nor did it prevent blood splattering on the metal door, lighting up like the sun as the door opened. Rudder's scream echoed in Kase's skull. The small group of hooded Searles fled through the opening and slammed the door shut, taking the screaming Rudder with them. Hallie pulled herself out of his grip, taking off toward the door. Kase cursed, but he followed. When they reached it, Kase grabbed the edge and tugged. There was no obvious handle, and it didn't budge. He glanced back at Zeke 20 feet away, facing down another wave of surls. His brother fired relentlessly, but it was like swimming upstream. Hallie tugged on the door with Kase again. Nothing. Tears laced her voice as she said, "We have to get in! Why won't it work?" Kase grabbed Hallie and pulled her down as a blue flash of light burst over their heads. The pistol she'd been holding clattered to the ground. Her whole body shook as she looked up at him, her eyes wide. "The blood! We have to use the blood!" Golden bursts headed their way, but the Yalvs wouldn't make it in time to help. Kase spun, looking for another Yalv to use. "But we don't have a Yalv to open it for us." "The arm!" Zeke sprinted toward them. "But isn't that disrespectful?" Hallie asked, at the same time Kase leapt toward Rodder's mangled arm. With a silent apology and a grimace, he smeared the Yalv's blood across the cool metal. Zeke fired more shots, and Kase and Hallie ducked as more blue fire flew past them. When they looked up, the blood glowed, turning from red to gold. The door opened, and Kase shoved Hallie inside. He glanced at Zeke. "Go!" his brother shouted, still trying to hold back the others. "Not without you!" Kase growled, grabbing the back of Zeke's shirt. Zeke yanked away and kept firing. "I'll hold them off!" "Zeke, get in here!" Kase yanked at his brother's shirt once more. Zeke turned, pulling out of Kase's grip, and shoved him through the opening. "For once, will you just listen?" Moments like that were always strange. The first time had been 3 years ago, when Anna had run into the furious flames engulfing the small cottage in the lower city. The second was only 2 months earlier, when the Greenie pilot slid from the hangar roof, slick with rain. It was something Kase would never be able to fully explain. It was like his heart beat in time with the clicking of a malfunctioning mechanical clock. Each second, each movement, each breath lasted for an eternity. Before Zeke finished his sentence, a burst of blue hit him in the leg, and he fell to one knee. Zeke roared and fired his own weapon. Blood and blue fire gushed out of the wound and pooled on the ground. Kase's eyes widened as another glowing bullet smashed into his brother's chest, and Zeke crumpled. But before Kase could leap back through the small opening, his brother used the last of his strength to shut the door. The metal creaked and slammed as cool air froze in Kase's lungs. And then the screaming began. Chapter 27. I Do Remember. Hallie. The fighting on the other side of the door threatened to drown Hallie, but that was nothing compared to the screaming in her head. She shut her eyes and willed it to go away, willed herself to wake up from the terrible nightmare she'd found herself in. But Kase's shouts only proved she wasn't asleep. "Zeke! No, you can't!" Hallie's vision blurred, and she choked on the sob stuck in her throat. Zeke. Brave, sturdy, trusting Zeke. Her fingers quaked as she brought them up to her mouth. She'd seen the blood, seen the final shot as Zeke's body convulsed and crumpled to the ground. Just like a lifetime ago when the beam, the entire section of the abandoned mine, had crashed down from the ceiling. She should have screamed. She should have grabbed Jack's hand, but she didn't. Because she and Niels were nothing but cowards. Jack, Ebba, and now Zeke. How many deaths would she have to witness before her own? Her knees gave out, and she fell to the ground of the rough-hewn, torch-lit tunnel. Kase's grief echoed off the stone walls. She clawed at her ears, willing the noise to stop, but it didn't. There was no blocking it out. I can't fall apart now. She lowered her hands and inhaled as deep as she could. Her lungs ached with the effort, but that helped ground her and clear her head. The Searles. They were somewhere in this temple. They were trying to find the gate, and Hallie didn't want to find out what they would do with it. If they could hold them off long enough for the Yalvs to get there, they might stand a chance of saving Jade, or Yalvara, from whatever would happen. She pushed herself to her feet. Kase knelt in front of the door, weakly pounding on it, his voice growing hoarse. Zeke, don't leave. he gasped as Hallie dropped beside him. He didn't acknowledge her, and she had to blink away the memories. It hurt like a knife in her heart, but they had to keep moving. Kase! His fist hit the door again and came away bloody. He'd scraped it raw. Kase! Another bloody fist on the metal. Kase! She shouted as she grabbed his sweaty face in her hands and forced him to look at her. His dark blue eyes were wild, wilder than his hair and streaming with tears. He choked. I can't leave him. Anna, the Greenie, Ben, all those people, the fire. Hallie's fingers tightened on the sides of his face as she pushed her own pain aside. Don't waste Zeke's sacrifice. But he's just on the other side. Listen to me. Hallie shouted through a sob she let escape, but she didn't let go of Kase. You can't save him. He did this so we could live, so we could save Jade. We have to go. I won't leave him. His voice rose, pitching toward hysteria. Kase! He clawed at the door once more. I can't. I won't. Zeke! You can, and you will. No! Kase shook her off, pounding on the door again, still shouting through his tears for his brother. So Hallie did the only thing she thought would shock him out of it. She slapped him. All those weeks ago she'd promised herself she wouldn't again, but he'd left her no choice. She couldn't go on without him. His eyes blazed as he raised a hand to his cheek. Why did you? We can grieve later, she whispered. But right now, we have to stop the Searles from using the gate. Kase, I need you here. I need you. Please. His eyes cleared, but he didn't say anything. We might be the only hope Jade has, so please, please. She dropped her hands to her lap as her voice cracked. Kase ran a hand down the door once more. The shouts, screams, and clashes on the other side were parts of a grotesque symphony. The elves had joined the battle in front of the doors. None of the voices were Zeke's. Kase sniffed, wiping away the last of his tears with his palms. I'm sorry. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Let's go. He nodded, and they got to their feet. Kase gritted his teeth as he turned away from the door. Do we have any weapons other than my useless pistol? Hallie bit her lip and shook her head. Do you still have your pocket knife? He took it out and flipped it open. This is it, I guess. Sorry. He shook his head and closed the knife, stuffing it back into his pocket. It'll have to work. What now? She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward what might be their last moments on Yalvara. Kase. The dark stone tunnel was long and winding, lit with only a few torches, and it was silent like the calm before the storm. Once they reached the first chamber, Kase nearly lost what tenuous grip on reality he had left. Blood pools glinted in the flickering torchlight, revealing a splattering of corpses, both Yalvin and Searle. Are any of them still alive? Hallie's eyes were shut tight. He squeezed her hand, although his chest was too tight and the smell of stale metal too pungent. He nudged an arm with the toe of his boot. Blood seeped into the leather, and his stomach lurched when he saw the nearest body without a face. I'll check. Don't look. Anything that might have been useful was a blob of melted gunk next to their owner's corpse. So it was the useless Yalvin pistol and a pocket knife to take on the monstrosities that had mutilated the corpses. Which way now? Hallie opened her eyes just a sliver, looking at the two hallways in front of them, avoiding the bodies below. Kase peeked down the left corridor. It was darker than the one they'd come out of, and eyeing the torches in the chamber, he couldn't reach them in their sconces. How much do you know about this place? Not much. Kase walked back toward her, avoiding a pool of blood. If this gate thing is so important, it must be down the largest hallway. Your deductive reasoning is impeccable. I can't tell if you're being serious or not. Hallie shrugged. Doesn't matter. I would say we should try down... Shouts echoed off the stone walls of the right corridor. Hallie and Kase jumped, Hallie grabbing the lace at her throat. I guess we know which way to go? Kase nodded and took her hand in his once more, leading her down the passage. It wasn't lit nearly as well, but feeling his way along, they finally reached another chamber, much like the last. After searching through it, only to find more dead bodies and melted hunks of weapons, they traveled down the only available tunnel. The sole illumination in this one was a simple torch, which cast long shadows along the walls, and the silence gave way to his terrifying thoughts. Had they chosen the wrong corridor? What if they killed Hallie like they'd killed Zeke? Holy moons! They'd killed Zeke. Kase's breaths came fast as he tried to swallow hysteria wedging its way into his mind. Zeke had died to save them. He was dead. He was never coming back. If that happened to Hallie, he would never... She squeezed his hand. Kase, we'll figure out something. We only need to stall until the Yalvs can get in. He clenched his jaw and blinked back his emotions. They had an impossible job to do, and if he went down, he would go down fighting, hoping it would be enough. He would be a hero, not a coward. His words echoed. I'd feel better if you hid down one of the other tunnels until the Yalvs get here. She ripped her hand from his and crossed her arms. The faint flickering of the lone torch danced across her face. I'm not leaving you. He shook his head. I don't want to make whatever made that mess. Please, I don't think I can handle it if something... He swallowed, but his throat was tight. I've already lost Zeke. I can't... I'm not going to lose you too. Blasted emotions. He couldn't even get a sentence out. With a brief hesitation and a slight quivering of her hand, she cupped his cheek. Her dark golden eyes met his, and something in his heart constricted at the determination reflected in their depths. Kase, you won't lose me. I promise. And then she stood on tiptoe and kissed him on his stubbled cheek. It was as light as a breeze, but Kase's heart nearly stopped and leaped out of his chest all at once. What was that for? Her cheeks turned a lovely shade of pink as she forced a smile. There's no one else I'd rather be with here at the end than you. The city was under attack. His brother had just died, and he and Hallie were scrambling to stop whatever the Searles were doing in these caves. But Hallie's eyes were bright and bold and... He stopped thinking and placed his fingers underneath her chin, lifting her face toward his. But before he followed through, the distant slam of a metal door echoed off the corridor's rock walls. They jumped, bumping heads. Shocks, Kase moaned, holding a hand to his forehead. At the same time, Hallie grumbled, Your head is harder than I thought. If you hadn't jumped out of your skin, this wouldn't have happened. So it's my fault? If you hadn't leaned in to... She covered her cheeks with her hands. I don't remember you turning away, Kase whispered. The heat crept into his own face. We need to keep going. As he took a step, he caught Hallie's muttered curse. Blasted door. His stomach leaped as a grin crept onto his face. He held out his hand. With a small smile of her own, she laced her fingers through his. He squeezed softly. Let's go, Hals. As they walked down the corridor together, Kase almost forgot the dark thoughts clawing at the edges of his mind. Almost. Promise me you'll do what I say when we find the Searles. Deal? Hallie took a minute before she squeezed his hand. Only if I don't have a better idea. Kase rolled his eyes and chuckled. Fine. They continued down the corridor and stopped when they faced a door identical to the one at the entrance. Kase pushed and pulled at it, but it didn't budge. He cursed. Should I go back and drag one of the bodies down here? Hallie bit her lip as he saw the smear on the side of the door where a normal handle should have been. The Searles hadn't left anything of Rodder. If Kase went back to grab one of the dead ones, they might be too late, but it might be his only choice. He pulled on her hand. Come on, it'll be quick if you help. She stared at the door, unblinking, her breathing picking up in pace. Kase groaned. He tugged again. We have to hurry. Give me your knife. Huh? That won't work. Just hand it over." He pulled it out of his pocket and held it out. "What are you going to do with it?" She flicked it open and sliced the tip of her left index finger. She sucked in a quick breath at the pain. "What is she? Wait, how would that—" She smeared the bubbling blood on the metal. "What makes you—" The golden glow snatched the words from his mouth, and the door creaked open. "Holy blasted stars! Alli, what did you— Are you—" She wiped the blade on her trousers and handed it back to him. As he stuffed it into his pocket, she wound her finger up in the hem of her skirt to stop the bleeding. "No time to explain. Let's go." The grip of the Yalvin pistol was slick with his sweat as Kase pulled it from the back of his pants, but he clutched it as he pushed the door open and stepped inside, Alli behind him. Kase racked his brain, reeling over her revelation as he crossed the threshold. He didn't have time to ask the millions of questions he now had as a wave of heat flooded over him, just like when they'd entered the palace. "No, no, no," Alli gasped. 2 people stood before a glowing archway, and a third lay at their feet, groaning in pain. Rodder. The archway was the only light in the cavern room, but it shone as bright as a dozen lanterns. Carved metal blocks, not unlike the pillars in the forest, made up the arch itself. The 2 Searles inspected the space between the stones, where images flashed by too fast for Kase to grasp what they were. One of them held the cannon prototype. "That's the gate, isn't it?" he whispered. "What did you say about it? It's a weapon?" Alli grabbed a fistful of his jacket and pulled him close, trying not to attract the men's attention. "I found a note in my book. I didn't understand. I still don't, but the Searles have an essence, and Kase—" A sound from the archway made Kase glance up toward the men, and his heart leaped into his throat. Crashing, burning, and blasted stars! At first, the flashing images and light coming from the gate distracted him from taking stock of the men in front of it, but the one on the right stood with his arms crossed and hood fallen back, his blonde hair backlit by the gate's light, making it appear like a crown. There was no question, even from behind. Every nerve in his body tingled as he jerked out of Hallie's grip. "Skibbs!" His friend's features had always reminded him of a fox, with his sharp nose and clever eyes, but now they took on a more sinister feel. It was clear where his nose had been broken and reset after the initial crash. Alli grabbed Kase again. "Wait," she hissed. Her breath tickled his ear. "Something's not right." Skibbs blinked hard and stumbled forward, catching himself before he made it 5 steps. "Kase? Is that you? Alli got my note?" "It was you? What did you mean only Jasper can work the gate? He's dead!" Hallie's fingers gripped tighter. Kase tugged out of her grip. "What are you doing? I thought you were dead!" A grimace skittered across Skibbs's face. The other man wore a blood-stained blue uniform. A Searle. Had he been the one to mutilate those bodies in the previous chambers? Skibbs's voice was sharp. "Tell General Coria we found the gate." "Yes, Agent Rice, but what about these 2? The man spoke with an accent, his S sounds drawn out. Kase held the pistol in front of him and pulled back the hammer, ready to fire. His finger trembled on the trigger, though he knew it wouldn't work. The grimace never left Skibbs's face. "I can handle them. Now go!" The man nodded and ran off, towing the cannon on his shoulder. He didn't stop and try to hurt him or Alli, but something was wrong. Kase focused on his friend. "What in the blasted shocks is wrong with you?" Skibbs ran a shaking hand down his face. "I didn't have a choice." Kase blinked sweat out of his eyes, his arm never falling from its position with the pistol. "I thought they kidnapped you, but are you—" He couldn't get the words out. He couldn't say what he was thinking, couldn't say what this was, because it wasn't real. It wasn't. Soon he'd wake up from this stars-blasted world he'd found himself in, where his brother was dead and his best friend a traitor. Pain squeezed his lungs. Skibbs bent to where Rodder still moaned. In the light of the gate, a sparkling rope bound his feet. Blood from his missing arm seeped across the stone. Skibbs's voice was low and thick. "If I didn't lead them here, if I didn't do exactly as they asked." Alli stepped forward, her hands in fists. Her satchel knocked into Kase as she stood beside him. "How? How did you— Jasper is dead! That book, he wrote it centuries ago." Skibbs's eyes were soft when he turned. His face was pained. He stared at Alli a moment too long before he looked toward the flickering images of the gate. "Jasper isn't dead, yet he's not truly alive, either." He paused and cleared his throat. "But none of that matters. Not now." Kase gritted his teeth. "What is going on?" His voice was low, close to a feral growl. Alli stiffened beside him. Skibbs stood. He opened his mouth to say something when his right eye twitched, then his shoulders. Kase stumbled back, but he didn't let go of his weapon. In seconds, Skibbs's face changed to one he didn't recognize. It was the same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, but it was like a new person had taken up residence behind them. Kase didn't know how to describe it any better than that. "Of course," Alli gasped. "The essence. You and Jasper, you're the essence. You took on whatever essence he possessed." "I did what needed to be done." Ben narrowed his eyes at her. "And when I discovered that you had the Gate of Time, I knew I had to do something. Ben didn't want to, but he's not in control. He's weak, unlike Jasper." He jerked again, and his eyes changed. He fell to his knees, shaking so badly that his next words were barely audible. "No, no, please don't." His moan broke the sting of betrayal coursing through Kase. He didn't know what was happening, but that pain lacing his friend's voice was real. Kase still didn't have a blasted clue what was going on, but he didn't care. He dropped the pistol and fell beside his friend. Skibbs pushed him away. "No, you don't understand. I can't control— Ah!" His whole body convulsed as his eyes went blank. After a moment, Skibbs shuddered, vomiting onto the ground. He wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "Give me your notebook, please, and then get out of here." Kase flinched away and looked toward Alli, who hovered near the door. He turned back to Skibbs. "I don't understand. Clearly you need help." Skibbs swung his arm at Kase, and he barely missed knocking him in the side of the head. "Leave the notebook and get out! If I don't do this, they'll kill Lucy. I don't have a choice. Please, I don't want it to kill you too." Alli fell to her knees on Kase's other side. "Why? Why do you need my notebook? Whatever the Searles want, it's only going to hurt Jade." Sweat slid down Skibbs's face like rain. "For the gate. I already destroyed the book, but you wrote what you know about it in the notebook. Maybe they'll be lenient, maybe they won't, and they want her, but I told them she wouldn't. You wouldn't cooperate." "Her?" His body convulsed once more, and Kase shot up, grabbing the pistol and dragging Alli with him. This time, Skibbs didn't regain control after the blank stare. Because when he stood, something else gazed out of Ben Rice's eyes, and whatever it was chilled Kase to his core. "Skibbs, not you too." Ben reached down and grabbed the now unconscious Rodder by the collar of his blood-spattered toga. "I'm sure Ben would prefer you make this easy, but he's always been weak." Kase's hands shook as Ben tossed Rodder into the gate. Alli screamed, but Kase could only stare as whatever had possessed his friend's body stuck his own hand into the images and mumbled words Kase didn't understand. His hand slipped through, the images reforming around his arm. They didn't slow in the slightest, and Kase's eyes burned trying to make out each one. "I'll give you the notebook," Alli yelled, stumbling forward. "Just bring him back." Ben shut his eyes and breathed deeply. "The Chronos served his life's purpose, and he'll finish you both off. It's what Ben would want, to save you from the pain of seeing what Cereline will do, and what will happen if we don't collect the essences in time. You are both worthless to me now." Kase swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his ears. He fingered his forgotten pistol and held it in front of him. Ben pulled his hand from the gate at last. In it, a shimmering sword followed, a dark blue gemstone in the pommel. The same gemstone Rodder wore around his neck. What in the blasted suns was going on? The sword was nearly identical to the ones Hallie and Ben had found just before the stoneman attacked. "What did you do?" Kase grabbed Hallie's arm and pulled her back with him toward the entrance. "What did you mean about collecting the essences in time?"
"Doesn't matter. You won't be here."
Ben took an experimental swing with the sword. "My essence controls the gate, and this sword is its key." Hallie's voice squeaked. "There's a reason the Yalvs agreed to the treaty. The essences are dangerous to take into oneself." Ben shook his head, stalking closer. Kase met his eyes. They were the same clear blue he knew so well, but Skibbs was gone. Kase didn't understand it, but he was gone. He couldn't feel his hands nor his legs. He didn't know how or why, but Skibbs was dead. "You're smart, Miss Walker, but you don't see the bigger picture, do you? I thought you were smart. I thought you knew." Trying to distance himself from the memories and laughter of days past, Kase took aim at his friend as his finger trembled on the trigger, even though he knew it was out of bullets. "Knew what?" Hallie asked. "It doesn't matter now. We'll find someone else." "Someone else?" Ben lunged. Kase chucked the pistol at him just before he and Hallie jumped to the side. The thing that had been Skibbs batted the weapon away with ease. "That was stupid," Hallie hissed as she righted herself. "There was a chance it had hit him in the eye." What could he do? Kase needed to distract him long enough so Hallie could get away. He refused to lose her, too. "Do you trust me?" Kase whispered as they edged back further. When she didn't answer, he caught her wide eyes tracing the sword's movements as Ben stalked toward them. "Hallie, do you trust me?" A breath. "Yes." Ben didn't stop his progression with the sword, held it out with one arm and pointed it directly at Kase's heart. Kase didn't know how to do it himself, but even he knew there was a better way to handle a sword. If he could get Ben off balance, he might have a chance of disarming him. Putting one hand in his pocket, Kase pulled out the knife, snapping it open, and stopped a few feet from what he hoped was the door. Kase would go down fighting, like Zeke. "Don't waste my sacrifice either, Hallie." When the sword was in striking distance, he took a deep breath. "Run!" The sound of her footsteps sprinting away lifted the weight from his shoulders as he flung his knife at Ben's face. It sliced across his cheek, taking a sliver of skin with it. "Blast! I missed!" Ben staggered and roared, lunging for the door. Kase spun to the side and kicked the hand holding the sword, but the weapon didn't fall. He grabbed the sword hand and tried to force Ben backward, away from the entrance. "I guess I'll deal with you first," Ben grunted. He was too strong. He shoved Kase off and swung the sword at eye level. Kase barely ducked in time, rolling to the side and coming up on one knee. His body throbbed from where he'd tumbled across the craggy floor, but if he hadn't been terrified, he might have congratulated himself on such a move. Ben tried to slash, but Kase went in low and tackled him before he could do much more than raise the weapon in the air. Kase groaned as they landed, rolling away when the sword swung toward him. He lunged to his feet and faced his foe. They were closer to the gate now, but it wouldn't help. It only illuminated the shadows on Ben's face. "Are you still in there, Skibbs?" Ben climbed to his feet with a wicked sneer, sword gripped in both hands. Kase breathed heavily as he used his shirt to wipe the sweat dripping from his chin. "You're quick," Ben said, "but I will kill you." Kase fell into a stance he'd seen hand fighters take, a slight bend to his knees, hands up and ready to punch and block. Not that either would stop a sword. "You were my friend, my best friend." Kase choked on the words. Ben's eye twitched. Kase continued. "Don't you remember? We always had each other's backs. Always. Remember?" Ben twitched again, his hand jerking to the side. Kase powered on. "We got so drunk after our induction into the cruise you had to carry me home while I sang Tovo Bless the Wenches at the top of my lungs." Another twitch. "Don't you remember all those training flights together? When we'd stolen that electric gramophone and hooked it up to the hover? My favorite song was that flowery, stringy one that sounded like... Kase barely got his words out now that the memories inundated him. His tears were salty in his mouth and mixed with the sweat. "Just remember, Skibbs! Remember?" Ben twitched violently, the sword scraping the ground, but he caught himself. He looked up at Kase. Tears budded in his blue eyes. "I do remember." Kase didn't leave his stance, his breathing all the more labored from his ears. "Then fight whatever's controlling you, please!" Skibbs wiped his eyes with his sleeve, still stained with blood, probably from Rodder. He shook his head, gasping. I can't! I've tried, I'm trying!" Ben lunged, thrusting the sword at a blazing speed. Kase dove to the right, but he wasn't fast enough. The sword pierced his left side, just beneath his ribs, and he fell. His head cracked against the stone floor, but he barely felt it. A labored breath. 2. And then, pain like he'd never experienced in his life exploded throughout his body. It was as if someone had lit a fire where the sword's tip had gone in, and it caught the rest of him in the blaze. He screamed, his throat raw. His vision clouded as he looked up through white-hot pain to see Skibbs, sword raised, tears streaming down his own face. I'm sorry, but I can't! The pain, it was too much. I tried. See you soon, Zeke. Anna. Chapter 28. A Gift from the Gods. Hallie. For once, Hallie listened to Kase, and when he gave the word, she ran. The other Searle hadn't bothered to close the door, to Hallie's relief. The first thing to go right. But when she was halfway up the tunnel, voices up ahead echoed off the walls. Kase? She whipped around, breathing hard. Is Ben following? Kase wasn't behind her. Torchlight flickered. No curly-haired pilot followed. The tunnel was empty. He was going to sacrifice himself. For her. No, I can't do this without you. Her boots slapped the stone floor as she sprinted back to the gate room. Words, shouts met her ears as she approached the door, but she didn't register what they meant because all she saw in her mind was Kase, bleeding and faceless like the corpses in the tunnel. Barreling into the room, Hallie slammed the door just as Kase screamed. She looked up to see him fall to the ground, writhing in pain. Please, no! Anguish seized her heart in its talons as Ben staggered over to his friend and raised the sword high above his head. Tears streamed down his face, but his words were chilling to Hallie's ears. I'm sorry, but I can't! Oh, stars! Oh, blasted burning stars! She didn't have anything in her satchel. Her notebook might throw him off balance, but then she'd be giving him exactly what he wanted. It was half the reason why they were in this mess. She stuck her hand in her pocket, and her fingers clasped around the rough texture of Ebba's twine sling and the pyrite rock she was going to give her brother, still blood-stained from when the Searles had shot her down. It would have to work. She'd been lucky once, and maybe she would be lucky again. Lucky enough to distract Ben, lucky enough to save Kase. Thank you, Ebba. Hallie pulled the sling out, thrust the loop on her finger, and fit the stone in the pouch like Kase had taught her all those weeks ago. Aim and hold tight. She focused in on Ben's face. It was the only place where the rock might do enough damage to catch him off guard. With nothing but a prayer, she slung it back and loosed it just above her target. The rock soared through the air and nailed Ben in the eye. He shouted and jerked back. Hallie screamed as she rushed forward and slammed into his legs, the move she used to pull on her brother when they were younger. Ben didn't expect it, and she knocked him off his feet. He stumbled over Kase's body, kicking Hallie in the face, and fell head first into the glowing gate. Except his hand snatched her satchel, ripping it from her shoulder. Hallie lunged for it, but Ben disappeared through the light. Gone. All her sketches, notes, her copy of the Odyssey, all had disappeared through the flashing images of the gate. She looked about for the stone, only to find it lying in a pool of blood next to Kase. No! Hallie stumbled backward over to him. He was still as the grave, if only for the barely perceptible rise and fall of his chest. Her heart pounded in her ears as she let loose a silent scream.
"I saved him! I stopped Ben! Kase!"
She found her voice at last as she crawled to his head. The blood pooled around the left side of his body and soaked the knees of her trousers. His breaths were scattered and his face scrunched against the agonizing pain. At least he was no longer screaming. What do I do? What do I do? She fumbled around for anything to put pressure on the wound, but there was nothing except that sword and the rock. Ben hadn't taken that through with him, at least. She looked at Kase's blood-drenched shirt and whispered a quick apology before pushing aside his jacket and gripping the tear where he'd done so to make the tourniquet for her days ago. He'd refused to wear the togas, and that was all the Yalvs had. She ripped his shirt all the way to his neck, revealing his chest. She tore off a good chunk of the linen and wadded it, pressing it onto the still oozing wound. Blood pulsed in her ears. Kase shuddered as voices grew louder from the other side of the door. Alli choked on the tears flowing freely down her face. What was the use? She'd be dead in minutes once those monsters made it through the door. The images of the mutilated bodies from the previous chambers flashed in her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut against them. Don't let me face them alone, please. I don't know what to do, she pleaded, her fingers slick with the blood soaking the shirt scrap. Wake up. Tell me I'm being stupid. Call me names. Anything. Her tears changed to racking sobs, and she leaned her forehead to his chest. Please. I promise I won't yell at you or slap you again. Just don't. His breaths had faded to whining wheezes, nearly drowned by her tears when the doors burst open. She screamed and scrambled to where Ben had dropped the sword sticking partway out of the gate. Before she could get the weapon up to defend herself, a Yalv blinked into existence before her. The weapon clanged as it hit the floor, barely missing Kase's arm. Move, miss, the Yalv said. It was Saldr. Grimacing from pain, his face was streaked in blood. A gash on his cheek needed to be stitched. He removed the bloody shirt wad and shoved his hand inside a small pouch hanging from his belt. As he pulled out golden dust, he pushed Alli out of the way with his other hand and smeared the contents onto Kase's wound. The dust's color bled to red. He murmured words she didn't understand, and the wound glowed softly. Kase's entire body jerked as he let out a whimper. Alli tried to shove Saldr aside, but someone gripped her arm, stilling her.
Lord Saldr will do what he can.
The Lord Elder stood above her. When she stopped fighting, he let her go, and she collapsed to her knees and hid her face in her hands. An image of her brother flashed before her eyes. Zeke fell again, followed by Ebba's serene face as she breathed her last. When would it end? Don't die. Don't die. Don't die. She rocked back and forth, hugging herself. Saldr's humming was a faint whisper in her ears. It was the same as the one the healer had used on them days earlier. It is up to him now, Saldr said. Alli stopped her rocking. What do you mean? Don't you have more of that blasted dust? The Lord Elder put a hand on her shoulder.
Vassar can only manipulate time so much. A gift from the gods, not meant to be used by man. We are limited in our knowledge of its use.
Alli crawled forward and grabbed Kase's hand, the one with the ring he never took off. Why was his skin so cold? The calluses on his fingers were rough, the ring chilled as she brought his hand to her cheek. His handsome features were soft, if streaked with blood and dirt. He looked only to be sleeping. Her stomach lurched. There's nothing more you can do?
The Vasa may yet work.
Saldr climbed to his feet.
His body must accept the gift.
How does it work? You said it manipulated time?
Time holds many answers.
That doesn't tell me anything. Stupid cryptic Yalvs. His silence pressed down on her, but Kase's breathing drew her attention. He sucked in a great gust of air and let it out slowly. He groaned, and his eyelids fluttered. Kase? Alli dropped his hand and grabbed the sides of his face. Kase, can you hear me? His chest stilled. No, Kase! Kase! She laid her forehead on his chest once more, her tears coursing onto his skin, and mixing with the bloody dust smeared on his wound. "You promised to get me home. I can't go without you. Come on, you promise, you blasted dull cop." She waited for the scowl, for an insult to one-up hers. Anything. Nothing. He was too still. Did that mean he was dead? She found his hand again and squeezed it as tight as she could. Past scenes played out in her mind like the moving picture shows she'd read about on First Earth. They flitted and fluttered in her mind's eye as the tears spewed forth even harder with each memory. Kase's tangled hair the first time he'd come into the bookshop, telling her to organize the shelves. Fussing at her because she'd messed with the ship's controls. The Odyssey held out before him in an attempt to comfort her. His soft smile after she'd kissed his cheek not a half-hour before. Why is it always me? She lightly pounded her fist on his silent chest. He didn't react, didn't move. And now I've lost you too. The tragedy Alli was doomed to repeat. No one stayed long. Kase was no exception. A fresh wave of tears flooded her eyes. Each one dripped down and mixed with the dust.
"Child?"
When she didn't answer, the Lord Elder put a hand on her shoulder.
"I am sorry. It seems Toro has spoken."
Hallie's vision blurred further.
Why didn't your magic work? You have all this power, hiding like cowards on this blasted side of the planet, and you can't save one single human? Why?
The Lord Elder looked down. "Man does not govern the Vasa. Sometimes Toro's answer is no."
Alli laid her head back down onto Kase's cold chest.
"Salder will stay until you're ready to accept Toro's judgment. Master Shackley fought bravely. He died a hero. Take heart in that, my child."
He left, and Hallie's chest ached as the rest of her body faded into numbness. She sat back and gripped his hand tightly in hers, trying to feel anything at all. Silence. Looking into his face, death had erased the pain, leaving his forehead unwrinkled, his mouth relaxed. She brought his hand to her cheek and leaned into it, closing her eyes. His ring rubbed her skin. She sat there in silence for who knew how long. The gentle hum of the nearby gate and her own soft sobs echoed against the stone walls. Salder didn't move, didn't make a sound. She wished he would leave.
Why am I always the one who survives?
She focused on the rough calluses of his fingers and how they caressed her skin. She never did get to ask where he'd gotten them. She'd never gotten to ask him much of anything, because of her blasted prejudice and his stubborn pride. All those arguments, all those wasted words. They'd cost her so much time. Maybe it was a desperate plea or just something to comfort herself, but the words of the melody the healer and Salder had used came to her, unbidden. She whispered them into the silence, the tune coming in gasping bursts.
Anohim anahuesa li vale hanora, jedremu hyasa le grenara. Protection and healing, O Creator of time, we humbly ask you grant us this gift.
She took a rattling breath, and as she did, his finger twitched beneath her cheek. She flinched, her eyes snapping open as she clenched his fingers tighter. Out of the corner of her eye, the dust in his wound glowed again, and the jagged cut resealed itself in seconds.
Was he? Did the song actually? Was she really Yalvin then?
That picture in the attic, the pocket watch working after the crash. Kase coughed. Eyes flying to his face, Alli gripped his hand tighter.
Wake up. Please, open your eyes.
At the sound of her voice, he blinked, and blessed slivers of blue peeked out.
Kase!
Her voice choked on his name. How was that possible? He'd been dead. He'd been dead. Blast it. She didn't care how it worked, only that it had worked. Kase blinked again, and this time he managed to open his eyes all the way. A sob escaped as she dropped his hand to wipe her streaming eyes.
Alli?
His voice was raspy from screaming as he tried to sit up. What's going on? Everything hurts. Alli went to help, but he shook his head. He brought a hand to his temple and groaned. Had he hit his head too? No matter. He was alive. Holy heavens, he's alive! Electricity zipped through her body to her fingers and toes, and sunlight burst from her smile. Inundated by tears for the first time in her life, Alli Walker couldn't find any words at all, even broken, incoherent ones. Before she could do something reckless like kiss Kase senseless or collapse into a blubbering mess, Salder spoke up.
Toro blessed you this day. I was not sure your body would take the Vasa.
Salder stepped toward them.
I do not have enough Vasa for your head, Master Shackley. Allow me to take you to the healing wing.
Ignoring Kase's weak protests, Salder picked him up as if he weighed no more than a child. Alli carried the sword in one hand, holding Kase's with the other, and followed all the way back to the palace, her breathing ragged and uneven as she tried to calm herself. By the time they made it to the entrance, she'd gotten it under control. But she flinched, pulling her hand out of Kase's grasp when she noticed a specific pool of drying blood outside the door. Bile burned in her throat. She swallowed it down hard. Salder gestured toward the palace.
I will take you to the Lord Elder. He needs to know what happened.
She nodded. They said no more until they reached the palace. Salder led her through the corridors until they found the Lord Elder in the healer's wing, attending the other wounded packed into the room. Once the man saw Salder, his shoulders relaxed.
Praise Toro.
Salder nodded, still holding Kase, who mumbled something incoherent. The Lord Elder strode over.
As you can see, we are full here. Lord Salder, please take Master Shackley to his rooms, and Healer Jera will attend him with more Vasa.
A Yalvan woman with dark red lips joined them. It was the one she thought might have been Rodder's wife. Alli felt something akin to a punch in the gut. Rodder. She looked away. Salder bowed his head slightly.
Miss Walker is ready to speak with you, Lord Elder.
With that, the man swept from the room, not waiting for Alli. She took one last look at Kase, who still hung limply in Salder's arms as the Yalv followed the woman back toward their quarters. She had to sprint to catch up with the Lord Elder, but he only led her to the same receiving hall she'd visited before. As he took a seat on his usual pillow, Alli knelt, the sword across her lap.
If you will, please tell me what happened in the temple this evening.
She gripped the sword tightly in her fist.
Explain how Cereline had an essence, and I'll tell you what I know.
Her words were strong, but her voice shook from fatigue and emotion. The Lord Elder's eyes pierced hers, but she didn't squirm. It was a minute before he finally spoke.
Those secrets are only for those who have earned the trust.
Alli fingered the handle of the sword, taking in the blue gemstone, the same one that had been on Rodder's necklace. She couldn't help the flinty tone in her next words.
Zeke is dead for your cause, and Kase nearly gave his life for it as well. We've more than earned your trust, Lord Elder.
Your words may yet lead you to the mountain's judgment.
When she didn't respond, he sighed.
It is our holy right to protect the gate. We Chronals are a sect set apart from our race and chosen as essences and keys. It is our holy duty.
But what does that mean?
She tightened her grip on the sword in her lap.
That doesn't explain why you broke the treaty. Or are there other essences not under your control?
The Lord Elder straightened his long tunic, much of which was splattered with blood from the enemies he'd fought.
Captain, will you please bring a pillow for our guest?
Alli spun. She hadn't realized anyone else was in the room. Stars. The captain had silky, thick eyebrows that furrowed as he left the room to follow orders. After the other man left, the Lord Elder turned back to her.
I'll answer as much as I am able, but I have many others to attend, so I'll not tarry here long.
Fine, Alli huffed as she sat on the pillow the soldier brought in for her.
The gate is the intersection of not just our timelines, but only Toro knows how many. The minor gates in the other temple corridors can be used to travel between parts of our own world, but this gate is the most important. That is why it is our duty to protect it.
Timelines? What would happen if an essence went through it?
The Lord Elder's eyes bore into her own.
Did someone enter the gate?
The man Kase fought, he fell through it. When I pushed him, he said he was the essence that controlled the gate.
The Lord Elder's silence deafened her.
It is impossible. The essence of Kase died nearly a century ago.
But he was able to create this sword.
She inspected it. Zuprium, judging from its coloring, but it must have been the purest form. It was nearly blinding in its shine.
Ben threw Rodder into the gate and pulled this out.
No emotion crossed the Lord Elder's face as he stood and took the sword from her. He inspected it as a scientist would an interesting new specimen. He set it beside his own pillow.
Even if the essence has returned, the gate holds many worlds too terrifying to even imagine, and he doesn't have this key.
He rubbed his eyes, a very human-like gesture that took Alli aback for a moment. He continued.
It hails from a land full of beasts deadlier than those roaming this side of Yalvara, one we closed off a century ago.
He looked down at the floor before finding her gaze once more.
Do not speak of this unless I give you permission. If you break your oath, you will face the mountain's judgment.
Alli tried to keep her growing terror under control, breathing as slowly and evenly as she could. She didn't quite understand how essences were passed down, but she knew she wouldn't get any further answers from the Lord Elder. Hopefully what she'd learned would satisfy the High Guardsman. Besides, Ben was never coming back this side of the sun because she still had the sword. Saraline would be unable to use the gate as a weapon against Jade. She took another deep breath. I understand, and I'll agree to keep it a secret if you help get us back to Kaivenna. And, if possible, we would like to take back Zeke Shackley's body for our own ritual burning. He held out his hand, palm up. Alli got up, placed hers on top of his, and bowed until her forehead touched her own hand. It was the traditional way of sealing agreements in Yalvan culture. He copied her movements.
We will preserve his body. We lost too many good soldiers this day. If you have no more questions or information for me, I must get back to the healing wing.
Alli paused. She wanted to ask him about her own history, but something in the back of her mind told her not to. What would happen if anyone found out? Kase was the only one who knew, and she could get him to keep quiet about it. If the Lord Elder knew she had Yalvan blood, he might not let her leave. Another question, then. Why would Saraline want to collect all the essences, and would every essence possess their, host?
I cannot answer.
But
I have told you everything I am able to tell an unbeliever.
The Lord Elder gestured toward the door.
But rest assured, Toro is in control, not those blasphemists of Cerulean.
Alli chewed on her lip. She wanted to ask more, but the look in the Yalv's eyes told her he grew impatient.
Thank you for your confidence.
He dipped his head.
Now, go check on your comrade and rest. We will speak again soon.
Alli nodded and rushed from the room. She would try and research all the information she'd just learned later, maybe when they returned home if she wasn't able to go to the Yalvan library. After a silent walk through the corridors, she finally reached the guest quarters she, Kase, and Zeke had been assigned to.
Oh, Zeke.
She blinked back the tears.
Not the time. Not yet.
With a heavy heart, she entered the common area. She eyed the food on the table briefly, then turned away. Someone must have left it for Kase when he awoke. Just thinking of food made her sick. Besides, her jaw ached from Ben kicking it before he fell through the gate.
Holy moons and heavens, this day was...
She made her way to the room Kase and Zeke had shared and pushed the door open a crack. The soft light of first moon coming from the small window laced Kase's curls. He slept, but he didn't snore for once. From time to time, she and Ebba had been able to hear him from their room on the Eudora Jade. Trying her best not to disturb him, she pushed the door open all the way. When he didn't wake, she grabbed one of the wooden chairs from the common area and set it down beside Kase's bed. She left the door open for light and for propriety's sake, and sat down. His breathing was a soft breeze, a curl rustling with each exhale. He'd lost his brother and nearly died himself, but sleep erased those painful memories for a time. Someone had cleaned his face and dressed him in a new shirt. With a deep breath of her own, Alli covered his hand with hers. A lone tear traced its way down her cheek.
I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, but I'm glad I went back.
She didn't know how long she sat there, watching him, but she didn't think he'd mind if she laid her head on the edge of the bed. Just for a moment. Just for a moment. Kase. When Kase's dreams faded away, he tried to snatch them from the air, but his left arm collided with something on the way up. Someone gasped, and he opened his eyes. It was dark, but as he blinked away the remnants of sleep, torchlight streamed through the open doorway. The soft gray glow of early morning glinted off the metal ceiling. Was it time to get up already? Maybe he could find out more about Yalvan fighting techniques in the library that day. Their complicated use of swords was intriguing, and... Ow! A voice whined from his left. He turned his head, though it felt like he'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Alli was there, rubbing her jaw. What was she doing in his room? His head throbbed again, and his entire body ached. Why did he hurt so badly? Alli? His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming for hours. What are you doing in here? She jerked and looked over at him. Stars, she was a mess. Bits of hair flew every which way from her face. She must have lost her hair ribbon. Her auburn tresses were scattered, hanging past her shoulders. Dirt and something like blood streaked her face. A bruise bloomed near her jawline. What in the shucks happened to you? Good moons, had someone taken a cheese grater to his throat? Water. Do you have water? She nodded and left, coming back a moment later with a cup. When he couldn't sit up on his own, she helped him. Her hand was tender on his back. What in the blasted sun's happened? He didn't recall falling asleep in his room, but he was there now. In fact, he didn't remember much of anything. How had Alli gotten so beat up? Why did his side feel like someone had sucker-punched it? And his head? Where's Zeke? He croaked once he finished the cup. He still sounded bad, but it didn't hurt as much. Looking over at his brother's empty bed, Kase took it as an excellent sign Zeke felt well enough to get out of bed. Worry about his brother's well-being had been eating at him for the past few days. Alli took the cup from him and sat back down in her chair, cradling the small piece of pottery in her hands.
You don't remember?
She avoided his gaze. With a grimace, he sank against the wall. He tried to think back, but his brain hurt. The throbbing pain reminded him of one of the times he'd gotten in a fight with Jove when he was younger. Kase couldn't recall what started it, but Jove had landed a solid punch to the side of Kase's face. Their mother had been so furious her ears had turned red. Zeke had been the one to tell on them, and he was the only one who didn't get a lecture afterward.
My head's spinning and it blasted hurts, Kase answered. I don't understand. Why isn't he with you? Why are you all dirty? Is that blood?
Alli inspected her fingers, gripping the cup. After a minute, her eyes, brimming with tears, found his.
Do you remember the Searles attacking last night?
What? They attacked the city? He clutched his bedsheets in tight fists.
Stop messing around and tell me what happened.
Alli sniffed.
You don't remember anything at all? The fighting? The gate? Anything?
What in the blazes are you talking about? She bit her lip.
They got into the city and you fought them. They wanted the gate and...
Her voice caught, and she glanced back at her lap.
And Zeke? And Zeke? Oh, stars, Kase.
He scrunched his face, tearing through his brain and grimacing against the pain throbbing on the right side. At last, flashes of light flickered in his memory. Blue and gold. He grasped at that and held it tightly. Shapes and sounds blurred and fizzled. Gradually, he recalled bits and pieces, and the more he strained, the more came back to him. He felt the grip of the pistol in his hand, and he remembered. He's dead. His voice broke as a tear slid from the corner of his eye to drip off his chin. The trail burned against his skin as another followed.
Yes,
Alli whispered.
Kase
closed his eyes as his memory replayed Zeke falling to his knee, his chest jerking, and a cold metal door shutting in Kase's face. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten here, or much of anything else, but his brother's last moments were a burning inferno in his mind. Zeke, the brave soldier, the favorite son, gone in an instant. Anger bubbled in Kase's stomach. Why was he so useless when it mattered? He could land a nose-diving airship in the middle of a storm, but he couldn't stop a bullet from hitting his brother in the chest? Why can't I ever do anything right? And they'd argued before joining the fight. He'd never gotten to apologize. Why is it always me? The anguish in his own voice dug deeper into his chest as it cracked again. Why can't I stop it? Alli's fingers were soft on his hand as she gave it a weak squeeze.
I felt the same way once, and it's still hard, but I've had to learn how to keep on living. You don't know how I feel. No one does. Kase.
He tore his hand out of hers and covered his eyes.
You don't. I couldn't stop Zeke from sacrificing himself. I couldn't stop.
The cup rattled against the floor, and the bed sagged as Alli took a seat on the edge. Why wouldn't she leave him alone? Just let him wallow in his misery for Moon's sake.
Zeke made his own decision,
she whispered. Kase tried to hide the tears he couldn't stop from flowing by wiping them furiously. They kept coming.
I haven't been able to save anyone at all. Zeke, Anna.
She shifted.
I know little about Anna, but...
Kase's chest lurched.
I blasting killed her. I got into a fight with my sorry excuse for a father, and then the fire. I could have stopped her, but
Alli sucked in a sharp breath, but that didn't stop him. I was right there as she ran into the flames to save him, and I didn't stop her. I froze. I'm nothing but a coward. The pain in his chest nearly crushed him. Why was it always his fault? He didn't save Anna. He didn't save Zeke. His breaths were scattered and made him ache all the more. Tears flowed freely from his eyes as his shoulders shook. He no longer bothered to hide them. All the memories rained down on him at once. The haplessly thrown cigarette, after arguing with Harlan 3 years ago, burned at the front of his mind. He remembered the blaze's orange glow as it ravaged the lower city, his arms streaked with ash. His father's condemnation of Anna for running off with the only boy she'd ever loved, ringing in Kase's head while he watched his sister run into the building to save the boy, only to perish herself. It was all Kase's fault. And now he'd lost Zeke, too. If only he had been quicker, smarter, stronger. If he'd only... Alli grabbed his arm. Kase, look at me. He stiffened under her touch. Go away! You don't want to be near me. I can't. Her hand fell away as his sobs took control of his body once more. Why couldn't he save them? Kase, Alli choked. You saved me, remember? His retort froze in his throat. She continued, her words growing angry, desperate. In the storm, from the dragon, when the Eudora fell from the tree, you fought off. You fought off the essence in the gate chamber. For me. So I could escape. You sacrificed your chance for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You saved me. He didn't know what the last one was, but he assumed it had been during the fight. His head ached and throbbed still, but he watched her anyway, studying her closely. She clasped both hands in her lap as she peeked at him through wet lashes. Blood and dirt smeared where she'd wiped her face. Her hair still had a mind of its own. Her honey-gold eyes didn't let go of the pain she felt, but there was something different. There was a determination, a desire to keep fighting, no matter the cost. In the beginning, this girl had infuriated him at every turn. She'd yelled at him, slapped him, pushed and prodded until he'd exploded, but slowly, without him realizing it, she'd become the woman who'd pulled him from the brink. In his heart, he knew her words were true, and while it would be a long time before he truly believed them, she was evidence he could. Although his left side burned like fire, and his heart pounded, he dragged his legs to the edge of the bed and stood. He stumbled, but Alli caught his arm. Kase, you shouldn't stand just yet. He shook his head and grimaced. He didn't quite remember why his body was so banged up, but he was sure it would all come back to him soon. Swallowing the pain, he grabbed her hand. Hallie's mouth fell open slightly. What are you doing? He didn't say anything, just pulled her up and into his chest. He tucked her head under his chin, holding her tight. After a moment, she relaxed and slid her arms around his waist. He gently kissed the top of her head, a whisper of a kiss. Thank you, Alli, for everything. Her shoulders shook, and his own tears mixed with her quiet sobs. He didn't know how long they stayed that way. He found he didn't mind. Chapter 29. Almost Home. Alli. Recovering from their wounds took a week, the physical ones at least. Hallie's jaw still ached from time to time, but it wasn't broken. For a little while, she'd worried she wouldn't be able to eat the food the Yalves provided during their stay. Apparently, they'd been holding out on them, but Alli and Kase had finally gained a little more trust, which was a highly esteemed quality to have in the Yalves' eyes. While the mysterious Vasa had healed Kase's most egregious wounds, he still tired easily, But on the 4th day after the attack, he'd griped and complained enough about not having anything to read that the Yalves allowed him to leave his room. As his condition was still of slight concern, the Yalves insisted they carry him in a litter down to the library, Alli at his side. Kase hated it, but it was the only way Saldr and healer Jira would let him leave the palace. Reading helped take the edge off the grief. A little. Hers more than Kase's, but he was trying. Alli hadn't found anything about what the essence controlling Ben had said about collecting them all, nor did she find information about how the gate actually functioned. She assumed that if the Lord Elder wouldn't tell her, then they probably wouldn't simply have the information she sought in a book readily available. Frustrating, but what could she do? She hoped Professor Christie was more forthcoming, seeing as he'd given her the Gate of Time to begin with. The Yalves used a different sort of Vasa on Zeke to preserve his body. Kase agreed he would rather take it back to Kaivenna and conduct a proper ceremony there, and Alli had been the one to negotiate the use of a wagon and horse to carry Zeke. On the morning of their departure, Alli, Kase, and their retinue stood ready in front of the temple doors. Saldr had been chosen to accompany them through the passage and to Kaivenna itself. Alli felt a little pleasure at being able to accomplish another one of their objectives. They'd completed them all, but it sure didn't feel like it. Strapped on the wagon beside Zeke's body was a small block of Zuprium, a gesture of good faith. Alli had been assured it wouldn't knock out the electricity or anything once they'd returned to Jade. Another mystery for her to explore.
"Lord Saldr, will you honor us?" the Lord Elder asked.
Nodding, Saldr took a slender dagger from his pocket and unsheathed it. He slit the tip of his index finger and pressed it to the door. When he pulled back, the blood glowed, and the door opened. Alli nodded to the guards as she and the others passed into the tunnel beyond. Saldr hadn't been the same since the death of his brother. Alli didn't understand the implications of the sword, but Saldr hadn't shown any emotion after Alli tearfully recounted the story to him, with help from the Lord Elder. She grabbed Kase's hand from beside her and squeezed it softly. He had refused to go near this place in the week since, and she understood. He still couldn't remember much of what happened that night, but he recalled flashes in detail, like Zeke's death and Ben being an essence. That conversation had been almost worse than the one about Zeke. Kase didn't speak to her for an entire day, only read silently in the library beside her. He didn't even eat the nameless fruit she'd snuck in for a snack. He also hadn't said anything about the door she opened with her own blood, but she didn't dare bring it up. She needed to talk to her father first, and then she could figure out what to do with the information, which might be nothing. Besides, who knew if Kase even remembered? Kase squeezed her hand and let it drop. He put his other on the wagon itself as it rocked a little on the uneven floor. During the week of recovery, the Lord Elder had sent people to clean up the gore from the battles within the temple, but as they entered the first chamber, she had to quell nausea at the lingering bloodstains. After taking the left corridor and entering a room Saldr opened with his blood, Alli found herself in a cavern, much like the one with the gate, only smaller. The solitary light came from the archway in the wall in front of her, but the images didn't flash by at the furious pace of the gate. "Is that Kaivenna?" Kase's hand slipped from the wagon and he stumbled forward. Saldr caught his shoulder. "Careful, Master Shackley." The Yalves' pointed teeth flashed. "A passage can be dangerous." Alli joined him. "Those are the airfields." She stopped. "Wait, can the other side see us here?" The Lord Elder shook his head.
"It can only be opened by a chronal on this side."
Alli bit her lip. "How will Saldr let you know what the High Council decides?"
"That is not for you to worry about, child."
The man's ageless eyes softened.
May the stars rise upon you.
Alli bowed and completed the saying in perfect Yalvan. The points in his teeth showed in his smile. He turned to Salder.
Go, my son. May the heavens guide you.
Salder's sharp features and pale skin glowed in the light from the passage. With a few words in a dialect Alli didn't recognize, he put his hand through the image.
Follow me.
He grabbed the horse's reins and tugged it toward the passage. The animal didn't flinch when it entered the image. Alli turned.
You promised to get me home.
Kase's small smile warmed her heart as he took her hand in his and led her to the archway. She squeezed it tightly as a light enveloped them.
Almost home.
Epilogue. Jove. Using the ashtray on his office desk, High Guardsman Jove Shackley snuffed out the cigarette. Hetty sat across from him, reading, rogue silver hairs falling into her narrowed eyes. The gruesome report detailed the crime scene and known facts of the murders of Stradat Richter and his entire household. She chewed on one end of her eyeglasses frames as she read. Every single person who had the misfortune of being at the Richter's family estate in Upper Kaivenna on the night of Tuesday the 17th of November, year 4500, was dead. Either shot to death with strange, frayed bullets, or slashed about the neck in a bloody smile. Morbidly, Jove wondered if Stradat Richter's red hair matched the color of his blood. Still senseless killings. No one had taken responsibility for it yet. The Watch had virtually nothing on the case, and Stradat Sarson wanted answers. "Isn't that the purpose of the Watch?" she'd demanded. "To find out if things like this are going to happen?" Jove didn't blame her. How had the Watch failed so miserably? He covered his eyes with his hand as he said, "How did they manage this? Richter's guards are some of the best trained anywhere." Hetty sat down the report on the desk.
Our informants in both Tevrubica and Saraline have nothing. Our domestic contacts haven't come up with anything either.
Jove uncovered his eyes and threw his pencil. "How could we fail this terribly?"
We're human,
Hetty answered, idly dodging the writing utensil.
However, that doesn't make it acceptable.
Jove glanced around his office, trying to think. It wasn't much, just a few personal effects, a small portrait of Clara on his desk and a landscape painting of the mountains on the wall. The light from the morning sun peeked through the gray window curtains his wife had sewn. "What do you think our next move should be?" Jove asked.
We should alert the response teams to dig for more information. Then we should...
The door burst open, a messenger yelling, "Hi, Guardsman! I apologize for intruding, but I've got a message, an urgent one, here." "Thank you." Jove held out his hand. While this particular messenger was always a tad too excitable, it must have been truly urgent for him to burst in without knocking. Jove needed to talk to him about that, but doing so would make him feel too much like Harlan. He scratched his stubbled jaw. He dismissed the lad with a wave and turned the envelope over, finding his family seal. 4 swords in a diamond formation with a star in the middle. From the Lord Capitan. Fantastic. He and Harlan hadn't spoken much since the murders. The Lord Capitan was busy with his new duties, as he was the one to take over Stradat Richter's place in the interim until they cobbled together an official election. Jove waited until the messenger shut his door again, then slit open the seal. He unfolded the message. "It's from the Stradat Lord Capitan. He says..." "Blast, blast, blast, blast!" Hetty tilted her head.
What?
"He's calling an emergency council meeting. Says they've found the assassins." Hetty shot out of her chair so fast it clattered to the floor.
How? Our informants haven't said a thing.
"I don't know, but he's doing it to undermine..."
blasted man.
Stars, can you not think of another curse? Hetty straightened the collar of her jacket. We need to go, now.
Jove grabbed his own coat from the back of his chair and slung it around his shoulders. The two heads of the watch sped out of their headquarters near the Jade Center and made their way to the large structure. Once inside, they hurried up the stairs and down the hallway to the council room. Jove knocked his specific code, and the doors opened to reveal the others already waiting in their seats. Old Stradat Loeffler was awake for once, and Sarson's lips were thin. On the other hand, Harlan sat with his chest puffed out and mustache trimmed neatly. This was the day he'd been waiting for. Too bad Richter had to suffer for it.
Stradats,
Jove said, with a small bow and salute. Hetty followed suit. Then they took their seats. Harlan stood up and spoke as soon as Jove pulled his chair in.
The kingdom of Cereline has taken credit for the murders of Stradat Forrest Richter and his household.
Of course they did.
Blast.
Jade was going to war whether Jove wanted it or not. Over the course of the next hour, they still hadn't come to a cohesive decision of what to do. Jove wanted to gouge his eyes out with a dull pencil on the table in front of him. Maybe a little extreme, but he'd do anything to get out of this meeting. Declaring official war was a process, an extensive one. Jade also hadn't been in a major conflict on that scale since the Great War. Sure, skirmishes, border disputes, and minor rebellions had happened, but nothing that required the process. Maybe the High Council was just a little rusty in that regard. That could be the only reason for the mess he found himself in. While he knew that he should have been listening, it was difficult to hear Harlan bragging, in his own way, that he'd been right to want to attack first the entire time. According to Harlan, it was the rest of the High Council's fault Richter was dead.
We call the city governors together and take a vote. Send out these summons today, now, the Lord Capitan said, his frown deepening. If you're all so stars-bent on following the process for declaring war, stop wasting our time. This act demands an answer, and we've already sat on our hands for days.
Hetty tapped her own pencil on the parchment in front of her. Maybe she was also contemplating sticking it somewhere unpleasant. Her voice was stretched thin when she said, We need to tell the public. The reporters are already starting to sniff around. It's a miracle no one's found out yet. Sarson's eyes were red-rimmed as she snarled, If the Watch had been working to their full potential, we would have had this information days ago, or maybe we'd have stopped this assassination to begin with. A tear skittered over the deep scar in her cheek, a crack in her otherwise steel exterior. If proper decorum would have allowed it, Jove would have started banging his head on the table in front of him. From eye-gouging to head-banging, at least the latter wouldn't be as bloody. He knew the Watch had failed, but at this moment there was no use arguing over that fact or casting blame. What was done was done. They could only prepare and make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. And I'll keep telling you until it finally resonates through your thick skull. Hetty waved her reading glasses in her hands. It was an inside job. That's the only explanation. None of our field agents knew anything. Someone's turned traitor for that blasted scum of a Cyril King, and you know it.
And that is still under the jurisdiction of the Watch. If you're so incompetent, we should consider replacing you.
Harlan's tone was like the thin edge of a knife.
We need to strike Soladrid, now. We're all incompetent, seeing as the only thing we're doing is sitting around shouting at one another.
Jove stood up, both palms pressed against the table. Time to end this ridiculous sham.
If we need the full Governor's Council approval to declare war, we need to get moving. Young Shackley is correct,
Loeffler said, his eyes clear. He looked more alive than he had in the entirety of Jove's acquaintance with him. Maybe the thought of being offed by a Cyril assassin was the only thing that could wake him up.
He has a good head on his shoulders.
Thank you, Stradat Loeffler, Jove said with a nod. I'll send out the messages unless any of you have objections, which would be incredibly stupid of you." Inside, Jove cringed at his word choice, but he was at the end of his tether. "Go," Harlan said when no one spoke up to oppose. No emotion crossed the Lord Capitan's face, just like a stone wall. Jove nodded and left the chamber, slamming the door behind him. The wireless telegraph office was just down the corridor from the council chamber. Jove wished he was forced to walk further. Alas, the operator, a pudgy, mustached man named Porter, jumped when Jove entered. Hi, guardsman, I wasn't sleeping, I promise, sir," he fumbled. Jove pushed past him. "You're dismissed, Mr. Porter. I need to make a private transmission." Yes, sir. Will you not be mentioning this to Stradat Sarson?" Jove closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't mean to be rude, Mr. Porter, but you have 3 seconds to leave this room." Of course, Sir High Guardsman," Porter squeaked as he left the room, slamming the door behind him. Finally. Jove snatched the notepad and pencil from the desk and wrote out his message. He'd burn it later, but it always helped him to write it out with the correct dots and dashes before he sent something. He'd have to send it 6 times to the cities in each major province, including the governor's office there in Kaivenna. Governor's report, Kaivenna, stop. 23 November 4500. Stop. Hovers coming. Stop. That should be enough information without revealing anything sensitive in case of interception. Jove walked to the Kaivenna machine and prepared to send the message, but just then one of the machines behind him began tapping. Jove cursed, flipping the page. He shouldn't have sent Porter away. He transcribed what he could, but he knew he missed the first bit, as well as a few dots here and there. Stars, this job was hard. He really should have been nicer to Porter. Once the tapping stopped, Jove translated the message, his pencil tip breaking as he finished the last word. "Crashing, burning stars!" Jove gasped. He tore the sheet from the notebook and ran down the hallway. Passing Porter, he yelled, "Go back in there and interrupt me if you get anything else from Fort Achilles!" Whether or not Porter acknowledged the order, Jove didn't know, but he skidded to a halt in front of the council room doors and tried to knock his passcode. It took him 3 tries to get it right. The other members of the council did not look amused. Harlan, in particular. Jove held up the message. "Searle troops have attacked Fort Achilles. The company stationed there is engaging, but Courier has sent at least a legion, and reinforcements are half a day's march away." No one spoke. All eyes were on Jove, unblinking. Then it erupted. "And this is why you should have listened when we told you to send more troops, Lord Capitan," Hetty growled. Harlan's eyes were ablaze as his fist pounded the table. "Enlistment is down, and our soldiers are far better than anything Cereline can fling at us." Jove tried not to crush the message in his hand as he watched the 3 go back and forth, Sarson adding in her useless 2 coppers. "The passes are all snowed in for the winter. They can't go anywhere," the woman shouted. "Sacrificing a few for the good of the whole is our only option. Achilles is well equipped to take care of it." Loeffler got up from his chair and walked to Jove. He had a slight limp in his right leg. If Jove had heard correctly, he'd gotten it in one of the border skirmishes nearly 50 years ago, when the Yalvs were still on this side of the world. He put a hand on Jove's shoulder. "I'll go help the young man in the telegraph office figure out if they have more information." Even his voice sounded like it might give out any day now. Jove closed his eyes but nodded. The old man probably only wanted a quiet place to take a nap. Why in the stars did he not just retire? "Coppen, Shackley, why didn't we know about this attack beforehand?" Harlan demanded. "So I'm just Shackley now? Weren't they just in Solidrid? How did Courier get an entire legion to the border so quickly? Tell me that." Sarson's face turned red in her frustration. Jove tuned the rest of it out. He couldn't take it anymore. Foolish, idealistic Jove from 3 years ago had thought he could change the world. But at that moment, watching 3 of the most powerful people on Yalvara bicker like children. He didn't want to be part of it any longer. He strode calmly to the table and smoothed out the transmission on top of the papers he'd been reading earlier. Picking up his pencil, he stuck it in his pocket for a souvenir, and promptly turned and walked out of the council room. "Where do you think you're going?" Harlan barked. Jove spun on his heel, hand on the knob. "No one can agree on anything because of your overinflated egos. Consider this my resignation as High Guardsman. Good day." "Jove!" He didn't turn this time. Instead, he slammed the door, cutting off Harlan's voice. No one followed Jove. No one stopped him as he exited the Jade Center and emerged into the chilly November afternoon. "That might have been the dumbest decision I've ever made." He fingered the pencil in his pocket, and after a minute flung it to the side of the road. "But Clara's making those fantastic buttered potatoes tonight. I'd much rather worry about that." He'd talk to Hetty tomorrow and see about taking a desk job. Someone else could handle the rest. Because for the first time in years, Jove felt a weight lift off his shoulders he hadn't even known he'd been carrying. The end. To be continued in Book 2, Realms of Wrath and Ruin. We hope you have enjoyed this production of Cities of Smoke and Starlight, written by Alli Earnest, narrated by Magnus Carlsen, published by Dragon Page Entertainment. Recorded books are available wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to Recorded Books. This book and production copyright 2023 by Alli Earnest.